I want to make it very clear. I'm not asking people to unite with people that stormed the Capitol. And the fact of the matter is, if you are under the assumption that 2 million patriots came from around every corner of this country to Washington, D.C. to storm the Capitol, you have it completely wrong. Nobody stormed that Capitol. The fact of the matter is, January 6th was a day of complexity. And there's video that will support every single thing I'm saying. There were good cops that day. There was good law enforcement that day that did your job. There was good, outstanding patriots. And to be honest, the reason why January 6th didn't become a complete massacre is because the good patriots within that 2 million, within those around the Capitol, that called for people to respect law enforcement, to not vandalize, to not do a lot of the things that did happen. And there's video that will prove and that shows, if you look, forget the mainstream media narrative, forget the political elite narrative, this was not an insurrection. What it was 2 million people coming out, standing up, their God-given, constitutionally protected right to demand a redress of our government. And it was intended to be peaceful. It was supposed to have been peaceful. But what happened was you had provocateurs at the front of it that created and launched a lot of things that assaulted officers. And the officers and the law enforcement that day, rather than retaliate and do what they're trained to do, and to take those provocateurs into custody, they fired munitions. 2 different barrages, two different 20-minute barrages of munitions and flashbangs and rubber bullets over the provocateurs into a peaceful crowd. That's where Benjamin Phillips and Kevin Greeson died. That's where they were murdered. So those of you thinking that when we talk about uniting and standing for the principles of our nation, that includes in some way, shape, or form storming our seat of government, as Nancy Pelosi says, no, absolutely not. You have it wrong. What we're asking for, freedom, liberty, and justice. Justice, because there was bad actors on both sides, and that includes law enforcement. There's a person who murdered Ashley Babbitt. Michael Leroy Byrd. And if we are ever, any American to ever have hope in our justice system, he must be brought to justice. And I just want to make that very clear. My apologies.
Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boylan, Kevin Greeson, Benjamin Phillips, Officer Brian Sicknick, rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
Thomas Ballard, held 415 days. Pauline Bauer, held 498 days. Joe Biggs, held 525 days. Jeremy Brown, held 364 days. Alan Byerly, held 461 days. Daniel Caldwell, held 596 days. Jake Chansley, held 629 days. William Cressman, held 630 days. Meredith Cleveland, held 629 days. Lonnie Kaufman, held 630 days. Mason Corson, held 303 days. Lucas Denny, held 291 days. David Dempsey, held 400 days. Charles Donahoe, held 562 days. Derek Evans, held 59 days. Scott Fairlamb, held 616 days. Brandon Fellows, held 616 days. Kyle Fitzsimon, held 603 days. Mitchell Gardner, held 462 days. Robert Gieswine, held 620 days. James Grant, held 351 days. Matthew Green, held 527 days. Timothy Hale Cusinelli, held 621 days. Kenneth Harrelson, held 569 days. Donald Hazard, held 291 days. Albuquerque Head, held 539 days. Shane Jenkins, held 574 days. Douglas Jensen, held 629 days. Justin Jersey, held 66 days. Daryl Johnson, held 476 days. Cash Kelly, held 624 days. Josiah Kenyon, held 317 days. Julian Cater, held 564 days. Matthew Kroll, held 220 days. Jacob Lang, held 622 days. Nicholas Langard, held 533 days. Cody Mattis, held 358 days. Mark Mazza, held 322 days. James Malt, held 358 days. Ronald Maccabee, held 409 days. James McGrew, held 491 days. Sean McHugh, held 491 days. Jeffrey McKillop, held 564 days. Kelly Meggs, held 589 days. Jonathan Mellis, held 596 days. Garrett Miller, held 618 days. Matthew Ryan Miller, held 613 days. Jordan Mink, held 619 days. Robert Morse, held 437 days. Marshall Neef, held 382 days. Ryan Nichols, held 620 days. Ethan Nordane, held 604 days. William Robert Norwood, held 204 days. Joseph Padilla, held 584 days. Robert Palmer, held 572 days. Dominic Pizzola, held 624 days. Mark Ponder, held 66 days. Chris Quaglin, held 541 days. Barry Ramey, held 162 days. William Reed, held 547 days. Guy Reffitt, held 623 days. Zach Rail, held 374 days. Stuart Rhodes, held 260 days. Howard Richardson, held 304 days. Thomas Robertson, held 625 days. Daniel Rodriguez, held 548 days. Jeffrey Sable, held 616 days. Ryan Samsel, held 608 days. Ronald Sandlin, held 610 days. Peter Schwartz, held 603 days. Jeffrey Sills, held 469 days. Barton Shively, held 619 days. Peter Stager, held 624 days. Andrew Taki, held 434 days. Enrique Tario, held 206 days. Dustin Thompson, held 613 days. Jessica Watkins, held 621 days. Jack Witten, held 631 days. Ricky Chris Wilden, held 172 days. Kyle Young, held 534 days. Christopher Georgia, Matthew Perna, Mark Ungst, rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
Say her name.
Ashley Babbitt.
Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt.
Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt. It's powerful. Where's the justice? Where's America? We have rights. Why are they being held without rights?